Item number 6140, Level 1, Unrestricted. Containment Class, Keter. Disruption Class, Amida. Risk Class, Critical. Special Containment Procedures. Joint Task Force Omega 100 Last Stand has been established in cooperation with the following organizations: Global Occult Coalition, Pentagram, the People's Liberation Army Paranormal Force, GRU Division P. Until containment is established or the Foundation falls, MTF Nu 7 Hammered Down has been folded into JTF Omega 100 and placed under the direct oversight of O5-6. Foundation facilities in active areas are being evacuated and replaced with contingents of JTF Omega 100 in accordance with Deployment Plan 6140. Description: SCP-6140 is the Davite Empire, as described in SCP-140, expected to fully materialize within consensus reality on March 20th, 2022. SCP-140 has fully breached containment and will result in Incident 140-CK, causing SCP-6140 to manifest. The Overseer Council has preemptively declared the event a BK-class Broken Masquerade scenario due to the extensive use of hostile and reality-altering anomalies by SCP-6140 even into the modern day. Addendum 6140.1 Threat Assessment. A joint working group between the Department of Analytics and the Department of Applied Force produced a report outlining the primary dangers associated with a modern-day Davite empire. It was based on information from SCP-140, archaeological findings, study of Davic inscriptions and documents, and parastatistical data models. Ground Force. Threat high. Estimated active personnel of 2.4 million. Full access to modern equipment via purchases from foreign suppliers. Air Force. Threat medium. Comparatively small but modern Air Force. Existence of stealth technology contested, though anomalous modification of aircraft is possible. Navy. Threat low. The controlled area is largely landlocked. Outside alliances. Threat high. SCP-6140 will likely have extensive control or influence over nearby countries far beyond its boundaries. Operations are underway to preserve geopolitical structure and prevent immediate cascade into an SK-class dominance shift scenario. Infrastructure. Threat high. Military organizations should have no difficulty transferring troops and equipment, even in the event of a multi-front war. Espionage. Threat unknown. Existence of a national spy agency is likely. Further details about capabilities are unknown. Humanoid modification. Threat medium. Able to cause significant changes to individuals for specific purposes. Tactical possibilities are unknown. Apex Tier Pluripotent Entity Collusion. Threat high. Destructive ability believed to be enhanced through pacts with the Scarlet King. Biological weaponry. Threat high. Historical records show highly developed anomalous transfiguration abilities. Possibility of plant or fungus-based contagion likely. Nuclear weaponry. Threat severe. Davite control of nuclear weapons and ICBMs for delivery is a certainty. Addendum 6140.2 Inciting Incident. The existence of SCP-6140 is a consequence of a terminal containment breach featuring SCP-140, the original anomalous print run of a Chronicle of the Devas published by SCP-140-A consisted of 75 copies. Of these, 49 were destroyed by SCP-140's anomalous capabilities. Foundation agents were able to locate 20 copies and safely destroy them, leaving 6 copies remaining, SCP-140 and 5 additional copies outside of containment, collectively designated SCP-140-B. One of these uncontained instances was in the personal collection of Richard Bruce, 11th Earl of Elgin, a known Marshall Carter and Dark associate. Although Bruce observed the proper protocols for handling his copy of SCP-140-B and did not allow any liquids nearby, general security on his property was lax. As a result, a group of lightly armed anomalous individuals were able to break into his estate and steal it. Following the theft, Bruce immediately contacted Marshall Carter and Dark to report the incident. Given the danger inherent in SCP-140, Marshall Carter and Dark contacted the Foundation through a liaison, agreeing to allow the Foundation to contain it upon recovery. Mobile Task Force Mu-3 Highest Bidders was deployed to find the SCP-140-B instance. It was quickly determined that it had been stolen by a sect of the Children of the Scarlet King, intending to use the SCP-140-B instance to resurrect the Davite Empire, where the Scarlet King was worshipped prominently. MTF Mu-3 tracked the cult to a house in Elgin, Moray, Scotland, and attempted to intervene. However, they were too late and arrived to find that the ritual had been completed. Meanwhile, surveillance footage showed that shortly before their arrival, SCP-140 spontaneously combusted while in containment. As best can be determined by Foundation investigators, the ritual involved the ignition of SCP-140-B to bring forth the one true empire from this hoary and tired parchment. Thaumaturgic sympathy bonds caused the simultaneous destruction of all other copies of the Chronicles of the Devas. Following the ritual's completion, all known Davite artifacts began emitting Omicron pattern Hume radiation. The ritual was performed on the winter solstice, but is not expected to take full effect until the vernal equinox, when the Davite Empire will manifest in consensus reality at once. Addendum 6140.3 Foundation Briefing. The following bulletin was sent to all Foundation personnel to brief them on the impending manifestation of SCP-140 in baseline reality. From O5-1 at Foundation.scp to all staff. Subject: Impending CK-Class Scenario, Davite Empire. Date: 28 December 2021. To all members of the Foundation, in 3 months' time, there will be a CK-Class scenario of unprecedented magnitude. On March 20th, 2022, the Davite Empire will manifest in present consensus reality. Current estimates suggest that its territorial extent will stretch from central Siberia and replace most of modern Kazakhstan. For the benefit of personnel unfamiliar with the Davite Empire or SCP-140, a brief summary follows. The Davite Empire would be one of the most hostile and anomalous nations to have ever existed. Several novel thaumaturgic practices were developed in this area, including hemomancy, herbomancy, and necromancy. The state religion enforces worship of the Scarlet King, a violent, divine figure. An extant version of this group, known as the Children of the Scarlet King, has attempted to cause world-ending events on several occasions by summoning their deity. Their anomalous warfare capabilities will have been greatly enhanced through access to modern technology and weaponry. The danger or nature of such enhancements are unknown, but are believed to be extensive. All existing exploratory research projects are suspended. All non-essential containment work is suspended. Sites have been assigned specific tasks to protect as much of humanity as is possible. Expect a bulletin detailing your new priorities. On March 19th, all essential personnel will be moved to reality-anchored sites to provide immunity to the CK-class scenario. Class A or designated personnel will be relocated to extra-dimensional sites. We are currently working on installing additional Zyank Anastasicos constant temporal sinks, exacts, to resist retroactive disruption to the Foundation's existence. We will survive the reappearance of the Davite Empire, regardless of what happens on March 20th. Normalcy will be protected. The consensus will be maintained. From the desk of O5-1, secure, contain, protect.
Alert! Breach has begun.
Item number 6140. Object class neutralized. Special containment procedures. Outside of archival documentation, SCP-6140-A should be referred to by its legal name rather than as an SCP object. It is not considered anomalous. Information regarding SCP-6140 is classified Level 1 and available for research. Description: SCP-6140 was a CK-class scenario which resulted in the remanifestation of SCP-6140-A, a UN-recognized state officially known as the Republic of Davistan. Predecessor nations include the Davite Empire, various tribal sects, and its membership with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, all of which were forcibly suppressed from consensus reality until SCP-6140 occurred on March 20th, 2022. SCP-6140 occurred due to the destruction of SCP-140, a text which purported to describe the historical Davite Empire. It is now known that SCP-140 was highly inaccurate. Further, it was discovered that the former prevailing theory as to the operation of SCP-140, that it was restoring an ontologically annihilated civilization into being, was only partially correct. It was also the phenomena that had initially ontologically annihilated the Davite history. The complete destruction of all copies of SCP-140 undid its effects and ontologically reinstated SCP-6140-A to its original form. Most Foundation installations and personnel were reality-anchored in preparation for this event, and thus were unaffected. As a result, the internal consensus of the Foundation is now at odds with greater consensus reality. Discrepancies between reality have yet to be fully reconciled. The Foundation is currently working towards briefing personnel on the inaccuracies described in SCP-140. Addendum 6140.1 Historical Comparisons. The following table outlines inaccuracies described in SCP-140 and the truth as present in the legitimate Davistan. Previous reality. The history of the Davites is remarkably consistent, displaying little evolution over time. 6140 Consensus Reality. Completely unsupported, Davite culture has transformed significantly as technology and social conditions changed. Previous reality. The Davite Empire contained an imperial cult to the Scarlet King, which survived to the modern day as the children of the Scarlet King. This cult focused on violent masculinity as embodied in the Scarlet King. 6140 Consensus Reality. The Scarlet King never existed. The myth of the Scarlet King was invented by SCP-140-A to downplay the leadership of the Eptomancer and subvert the Davite matriarchy in favor of a more familiar Western patriarchy. Previous reality. The Davite Empire had one of the largest slave populations in any civilization in history, with approximately 75% of the total population being enslaved. 6140 Consensus Reality. True. However, shortly following this peak, a slave revolution destroyed the Davite Empire. All successor states have defined themselves as heirs to this revolution and abolished slavery in all forms, save for the short-lived Kovair sect, which collapsed following a military coup. Previous reality. The Davites were led by a long-lived and anomalous human subspecies known as the Deva, which practiced extensive cannibalism. 6140 Consensus Reality. The Deva were baseline humans who styled themselves as divine and were known to practice cannibalism. However, the Deva ruling class was obliterated during the slave revolution that destroyed the Davite Empire. Later Davite nations used the title of Deva for various leadership positions, but these later Deva had little relation to the original ruling class and did not style themselves as divine. Previous reality. SCP-076 is a humanoid anomaly within Foundation containment, an immortal warrior only capable of thinking about violence and farming. SCP-073 is another immortal humanoid, also in containment, believed to be the brother of SCP-076. Their names are believed to be Laschal and Cain, respectively, and are suspected to be related to Abel and Cain from Genesis. 6140 Consensus Reality. Laschal and Cain are Davite cultural heroes with no relation to any Abrahamic faith. Together, they led the slave rebellion against the Davite Empire. Neither was anomalous. Previous reality. The Davites practiced an anomalous form of horticulture, capable of creating sapient and highly anomalous plant matter with various effects. Various anomalies contained under the designation SCP-3140, SCP-392, and SCP-3399. 6140 Consensus Reality. Davite horticulture is highly advanced, but not anomalous. Techniques used in the nation have formed the basis for general horticulture around the world. Addendum 6140.2 Profile of SCP-140-A. In the months following SCP-6140, multiple Foundation investigations were launched to explain the massive discrepancy between the observed Davistani nation and the country described in SCP-140. One such inquiry was into SCP-140-A, the author of SCP-140, who Foundation historians suspected of having authorial bias. An investigative team determined that SCP-140-A was Thomas Bruce, 6th Earl of Elgin and ancestor of Richard Bruce. It was originally believed that Thomas Bruce had sponsored Laschal Curix in publishing a work which described the Davite Empire. Analyzing records present within Davistan, it has been determined that Laschal Curix never actually existed and was merely Bruce's pen name. In 1786, Thomas Bruce visited the Grand Khanate of the Deva. At the time, the country was significantly reduced from the height of its former power, the historical Davite Empire, and existed as squabbling regional powers. Bruce was fascinated by the past of the country, to the point of completely ignoring its present state. He wrote the Chronicles of the Devas, which ignored most of the country's history, and blended its popular mythology into the nation's history. A single copy of this text from the original print run of 75 copies was preserved in the Davite National Library, allowing it to survive both CK-class scenarios. It is believed that Bruce made contact with an unknown occultist for the printing of the Chronicles of the Devas. An extensive ritual was performed, and the printing began on June 20th, 1788, the summer solstice. Soon after, SCP-6140 began on September 22, 1788, the autumn equinox. This event fully removed Davite predecessor states from reality, transforming the inaccurate ethnography into the only ethnography. Addendum 6140.3 Dr. Jad Laschal's testimony. The Overseer Council asked Dr. Jad Laschal Pertan, a Davistani minister of the Foundation, to give a briefing on its national history in the immediate wake of SCP-6140. The following is a transcript of the briefing that he presented to the Council on March 21, 2022. Hello everyone. I hope you're well. I recognize some of you, but the feeling is not mutual. You've asked me to give you a briefing on my home country, which none of you knew existed. To make it worse, you are more familiar with a wildly inaccurate 18th century English Orientalist's scandalous and highly embellished depiction of our country, which was in fact anomalous and removed our country from existence entirely. This version of our country, if it had ever existed, would have been the bloodiest and most anomalous civilization in the world. You called me here to describe what my Davistan is. I'm not going to do that. You can find out what we're like later. No. Today I'm going to argue that we deserve to live, because that's the real reason you called me here, to decide what to do in the wake of this CK class scenario. I don't even know where to begin with that. I think I'll start with myself, why I'm here. In the timeline and world I remember, we were not expecting anything to happen on the equinox. As such, we had reduced security in the temporal exclusion and reality anchoring sites, and more personnel allowed outside them, all at normal levels, of course. I happened to be outside a site at the time, traveling between one. Then 6140 hit, and now we don't agree about anything. So you have that as a problem. We clearly have more consensus reality on our side. It's everybody else in the world who isn't a skipper than you do, so we're here to stay, I think. You have to let us stay. It's our whole ethos, and that means I need to give you a crash course into our history. My people, my nation, we're not anomalous. If the briefing you gave me is true, and I really have no idea because it was incredibly brief, then we've been on the wrong side of the joke for something along the line of 200 years. We're victims, and I'm worried that your knee-jerk reaction will be to play the joke again, because that's what you do. I've dealt with all of you before in my reality, the one I remember. I guess those versions of you are lost, but let's be honest, you haven't changed. None of you have changed in the entire time you've been alive. That's centuries for some of you, right? We're a peaceful country. If it wasn't for the actions of a single Orientalist and his book, a book I read as an academic curiosity, we wouldn't be sitting here today. You wouldn't know the difference between us and anywhere else in the world. Yes, we had a bloody past, but not without consequence. Yes, the Davite Empire had one of the highest rates of slavery in the world of any country ever. Maybe it was higher in Sparta with the Helots. But you know what happened next? We ripped the Devas apart and burned their palaces to the ground. A single prince decided to eat an enslaved child when there were more slaves than freemen, so his estate rose up and hanged him. And then because there were more slaves than Devas, that initial rebellion spread outward and toppled an entire empire. The true history of our nation is not one of eternal slavery. No, we were the first nation in the world to outlaw the practice, and we never let it return. But a single man saw that past, that single moment in which a prince ate a child, and he stretched it into eternity. He made it the past of the country. That slavery was the backbone of our entire past and the present. The revolution wasn't salacious enough for him, so he took the moment in time that was, and he made it the only image of our country, the only one that could exist, but without the release of revolution. Depravity, but without consequence. And it spirals from there, becoming worse and worse, because we had no voice, no one to say stop. It wasn't like that. It was nothing but tragedy what he did. So I come before you today and I have to beg you, do not repeat what he did. Do not do the same things. Do not force us back into the dark. Please. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you like what you hear, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/Kelsey Narrates and help support me by becoming a patron for as little as $3 a month. I'm not going to get rich doing this, but it does take money to keep a podcast running. All patrons get early access to every episode I publish. I don't have the talent it takes to write a skip. All I do is read. Original authors make this podcast possible, so credit to the original author. There are links in the description. Show them some love as well. Consider becoming a member of the SCP Wiki. Upvote their work and maybe write a skip of your own. Maybe I'll read it here someday. You never know if you never try. The content of this podcast and content relating to the SCP Foundation, including the SCP Foundation logo, is licensed under Creative Commons Sharealike 3.0, and all concepts originate from scpwiki.com and its authors. This recording, being derived from this content, is hereby also released under Creative Commons Sharealike 3.0.